The rain didn't just fall that night. It attacked the glass dome of the Grand Aurora Ballroom like 1,000 fists, each drop rattling the crystal structure as if the sky itself was warning that something ugly was about to happen inside. But no one in the glittering crowd cared about the storm. Not when the air inside was thick with champagne bubbles, expensive perfume, and the kind of gossip only the city's elite could trade with a straight face. It was the annual Hope Gala, a charity event dressed up like the Oscars. Celebrities posed for photographers near towering floral arrangements flown in from Holland that morning. Waiters in white gloves glided between marble columns with trays of caviar blinis. The clink of crystal glasses and the hum of strings from a live quartet filled every corner. This was the kind of room where fortunes were made with a handshake, and reputations could be destroyed with a single whispered sentence. At the heart of it all stood Daniel Everett. The man had the kind of charm you couldn't buy, though his tailored tuxedo, platinum cufflinks, and $20,000 watch suggested he'd tried anyway. Tall, with perfectly combed dark hair and that smug, practiced smile, Daniel had built a billion-dollar software empire and a public image as the city's golden boy. To the cameras, he was philanthropy wrapped in charisma. But Harper Langston knew better. She'd known the real Daniel, the man who could slice a person open with words and then smile like he'd just done them a favor. And tonight, Daniel was on a mission. She spotted him easily, standing beneath a glittering chandelier the size of a small car, holding court like a king at a banquet. At his side was a woman who could have stepped straight off a magazine cover, tall, 25 at most, with hair like spun gold and a laugh designed to be overheard. Her gown was liquid gold sequins, clinging to her curves with unapologetic precision. Harper's stomach churned, not from jealousy, but from the tiny rhythmic kicks inside her own body. Harper shifted her weight, her hand instinctively going to the swell of her belly beneath the storm blue silk dress she'd chosen for tonight. The baby was restless, like it could sense her rising heartbeat. She'd come here because Daniel had insisted, playing the concerned ex-husband who still wanted to keep things civil. It had been framed as an olive branch, but Harper knew a trap when she saw one. She was about to see why. Daniel leaned in toward his date, but his voice carried, whether by accident or design, across the table to a cluster of his peers. "Nobody wants a pregnant woman," he said casually, swirling the champagne in his glass. "Not in the boardroom, not at events, and definitely not in their bed." The laughter was immediate, sharp, and merciless. The young woman beside him giggled, her perfectly glossed lips parting like the comment was some brilliant truth she'd just learned. A few men chuckled under their breath, while others smirked behind their glasses. Harper felt the words slice clean through her. It wasn't the insult itself, she'd heard worse from Daniel in the privacy of their marriage. It was the deliberate way he said it here, now, in front of the city's most powerful people. He wanted her humiliated. She stood in the shadow of the ballroom's massive entryway, the storm raging behind the glass doors, the music swelling inside, and for a moment, the world seemed to freeze. Conversations became a dull roar, the lights too bright, her breath too shallow. She could turn around and leave. No one would blame her. She could retreat into the quiet of her apartment and wait for this night to fade into gossip she'd never have to hear. But she stayed, because in the corner of the ballroom, seated near the stage, was a man whose gaze had already found her. Tall, broad-shouldered, with an unmistakable air of power, he wasn't dressed for attention. But attention found him anyway. His charcoal suit was custom, his silver hair brushed back in deliberate waves, his cufflinks understated but worth more than most people's cars. She recognized him instantly. Adrian Wolfe, billionaire investor, media-shy mogul. The man who'd once turned down an invitation to the White House because he had better things to do. She'd met him only once before, briefly, at a tech summit Daniel had dragged her to during their marriage. She remembered his eyes, a shade between steel and smoke, and the way he'd looked at her like he saw more than the surface. And now, Adrian Wolfe was watching her like she was the most important person in the room. Harper drew in a breath, straightened her shoulders, and stepped fully into the light. The movement drew attention immediately. Heads turned, cameras pivoted, The hush of curiosity rippled outward. Her storm blue gown skimmed the floor, the silk catching the light with every step. She'd chosen it because it made her feel like herself again. Not Daniel's wife, not the pregnant one, but Harper Langston, the woman who had built her own design firm from nothing before she ever met him. As she walked deeper into the ballroom, she could feel Daniel's gaze snap toward her. Surprise flickered across his face, quickly smothered by irritation. His date's eyes narrowed, her gold dress shimmering as she shifted in her seat to get a better look. Harper didn't break stride. She moved past tables of donors and CEOs, the soft murmur of whispers trailing in her wake. Every step was deliberate. She wasn't just walking into a room, she was walking into battle. By the time she reached the center aisle, the quartet had subtly lowered their volume, and a photographer had started snapping frames. She didn't look at the cameras. She kept her eyes locked on Daniel until she was close enough to see the tightening of his jaw, the faint sheen of sweat at his temple. "Harper," he said, standing quickly as if to intercept her. "I didn't think you'd actually—" "Clearly," she cut in, her voice calm but edged with steel. "But then, you never think far ahead, do you?" A few guests nearby glanced at each other, sensing the shift. Daniel's date shifted uncomfortably, her smile faltering. Before Daniel could respond, another voice slid into the space between them, smooth, deep, and carrying effortlessly over the noise. "Ms. Langston." Harper turned to see Adrian Wolfe standing beside her, having crossed the room without her noticing. Up close, his presence was even more commanding, the kind that made people instinctively straighten their posture. "I was hoping you'd accept my invitation," Adrian said, offering his hand. His eyes flicked briefly to her belly, then back to her face, not with judgment, but with something startlingly close to respect. Daniel stiffened. "You know each other?" "Not well enough," Adrian replied, his mouth curving into a subtle smile. "But I'd like to change that, may I?" He extended his arm, and for the first time all evening, Harper felt the corner of her mouth lift. She placed her hand lightly on his sleeve. Daniel's face darkened. His date stared between them like she'd just realized she was watching a scene she didn't have a script for. As Adrian led Harper toward the front of the room, past the flash of cameras and the hum of speculation, she didn't look back. Not yet. That moment would come later, and when it did, it would be on her terms. For now, she let the murmur of curiosity swell around them, the storm still raging against the glass dome overhead. Somewhere deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. Because Daniel Everett had just made a very public mistake. And Adrian Wolfe, the man known for making impossible deals, had just made her an offer she couldn't refuse. Before Harper Langston was a name whispered in the marble halls of the city's elite, she was just a girl from a quiet coastal town where the air smelled of salt water, and every neighbor knew the contents of your grocery cart. Summers were for bare feet on warm pavement, winters for huddling by the old brick fireplace in the Langston family home. She grew up on the kind of street where mailboxes leaned from years of ocean wind, and the school's annual fundraiser still meant hand-painted signs and pies cooling on porches. Her father, George Langston, was a high school art teacher with paint perpetually on his hands. Her mother, Claire, was a nurse whose patience could soothe even the most difficult patient. They didn't have much money, but they had the kind of love that wrapped around you like a favorite quilt, steady, unconditional, and warm. From them, Harper inherited a stubborn work ethic, a love for creating beauty, and a deep belief that people were, at their core, good. By 16, she was winning regional awards for her architectural sketches, clean, bold lines that hinted at a mind already seeing the world in shapes and possibilities. A scholarship to Parsons School of Design took her to New York, where the skyline became both her classroom and her muse. She thrived in the city's chaos, juggling late-night design projects with a part-time job at a boutique hotel. It was at a rooftop networking event for young designers that she first met Daniel Everett. He wasn't the richest man in the room then, but he carried himself like he would be. Sharp suit, sharper smile, and a way of speaking that made you feel like the only person in the crowd. Harper had been balancing a plate of hors d'oeuvres in her portfolio when he struck up a conversation, asking about her work with genuine curiosity, or so it seemed. He was relentless in his pursuit, flowers at her apartment, lunches at places she couldn't afford, calls just to hear her voice. For a girl who'd been surviving on takeout noodles and subway rides, Daniel's attention felt intoxicating. He talked about her designs like they were genius, about her as if she were the missing piece of his life. Within a year, they were married in a small ceremony on a windswept bluff overlooking the Atlantic. Harper wore a simple ivory dress she'd found at a vintage shop, while Daniel promised her forever with the same conviction he'd later used to sell software to billionaires. In those early years, they were a team. She'd work late nights on her own design firm, Langston & Co., while he hustled to grow his fledgling tech company. They celebrated every win, no matter how small. But success has a way of changing the air in a room. Daniel's company exploded almost overnight after a deal with a major corporation. They moved into a penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the skyline Harper had once sketched for practice. At first, she thought the new lifestyle was just another chapter in their shared dream. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the we turned into me. Daniel's late nights became business dinners. His compliments turned into critiques about her wardrobe, her body, her small-time clients. Harper, ever the peacemaker, adjusted. She wore the dresses he liked, let her business take a back seat, and learned to smile through the boardroom galas where she was introduced not as Harper Langston, architect, but as Daniel's wife. Her work, once her pride, became something she squeezed in between charity luncheons and travel schedules. The pregnancy had been a surprise. A happy one, at least for her. She had imagined it would bring them back together, give them something to fight for. But Daniel's reaction, though outwardly supportive, was tinged with inconvenience. "We'll have to manage expectations with the investors," he'd said, as if their child was a scheduling conflict. As the months passed, the emotional distance grew into a canyon. The man who had once rubbed her aching feet after 12-hour shifts now recoiled at the idea of missing a networking event for a prenatal appointment. And then came the whispers, from acquaintances, from Daniel's own staff, about the blonde in marketing who seemed to spend more time in his office than her actual desk. Harper had brushed them off, unwilling to believe it without proof. That proof had come like a slap, not in private, but under the blinding lights of the annual Hope Gala, with half the city's elite listening. "Nobody wants a pregnant woman." Daniel had said it without flinching, and she knew then that the man she'd once loved was gone. But here's the thing about Harper Langston. She had learned long ago how to survive storms. She'd survived leaving her small town for the chaos of New York. She'd survived the brutal architecture program at Parsons. She'd built a business from scratch in a city that devoured the unprepared. And while she'd bent herself to fit Daniel's world, she hadn't broken. Not yet. Her friends, what few Daniel hadn't alienated, still knew her as the woman who could talk down a furious client with a single calm sentence. Her former professors still emailed her, urging her to return to the design world. Her sketches, hidden in the bottom drawer of her studio desk, still brimmed with ideas she'd never had the chance to build. And there was something else Daniel didn't know. Langston & Co. hadn't disappeared when she stepped back. It had grown quietly, steadily, under the leadership of her trusted partner, Mia Reynolds. The firm now had international clients and a waiting list for Harper's personal consultations. She had deliberately kept this from Daniel, partly to avoid his dismissive comments, partly because it was the one piece of herself she still owned completely. Which is why when Adrian Wolf's eyes met hers across that ballroom, something deep inside her shifted. She remembered the tech summit years earlier, the brief conversation where he'd asked her opinion on a building design instead of her husband's portfolio. He'd listened, really listened, and when she'd excused herself, he'd told her, "You see the world differently. Don't let anyone make you forget that." Now here he was again, at the exact moment her ex-husband tried to erase her dignity in front of everyone. And the way Adrian looked at her, not at her dress, not at the curve of her belly, but directly into her eyes, was like a reminder that she was more than the sum of Daniel's insults. Harper had always believed she could weather any storm if she kept her head down and her heart steady. But something told her this was no longer about weathering. This was about rebuilding. And this time, she wouldn't be building for Daniel. She'd be building for herself, and for the tiny life she carried. What she didn't yet know was that Adrian Wolfe was about to make her an offer that would change everything. Not just a business proposal, not just a lifeline, but an invitation into a world where her skills, her vision, and her name would matter more than any scandal Daniel Everett could create. And maybe, just maybe, it would lead her to a moment no one, least of all Daniel, could have imagined. Walking down an aisle in a dress designed by a billionaire, not as the woman someone discarded, but as the woman someone had chosen above all else. The Grand Aurora Ballroom had always been a temple of opulence, but tonight it was something else entirely. A stage, a trap, and a battlefield wrapped in crystal and velvet. Harper stood near the entryway, letting her eyes travel across the scene with the precision of a designer studying a blueprint. The ceiling arched high above, crowned by a dome of stained glass that glowed like a mosaic sunset under the chandelier's warm light. Every column was wrapped in cascading orchids, each bloom perfect, imported, and absurdly expensive. Round tables draped in deep plum silk filled the space, set with gold-rimmed plates and crystal goblets so fine they looked like they'd shatter under a whisper. The air smelled faintly of gardenias and vintage champagne, a combination that belonged to this world of excess. This was the annual Hope Gala, an event Daniel had called the pinnacle of networking. For him, it was less about charity and more about being photographed with the right people, shaking the right hands. For Harper, tonight was supposed to be about one thing: showing her face, proving she wasn't afraid to be seen, even after their split. But Daniel had a way of turning every stage into his own. From where she stood, she could see him moving effortlessly through the crowd, that signature smirk plastered on his face, his arm draped over the back of the chair belonging to the blonde in the molten gold gown. Harper noticed the way he leaned in just enough to make her laugh, the way his hand brushed her bare shoulder, as if marking territory. The tables closest to the stage were a roll call of the city's most influential: venture capitalists in tailored suits, fashion editors in couture, real estate magnates who could buy and sell entire blocks without blinking. These people didn't just attend the gala, they defined it. And every last one of them was within earshot when Daniel delivered his little proclamation about pregnant women being unwanted. That comment still echoed in Harper's mind, not because it hurt, she'd been inoculated against his cruelty long ago, but because of how intentional it was. Daniel wanted an audience. He wanted her to hear it. He wanted them all to hear it. It was a performance designed to paint her as pitiable, disposable. She inhaled slowly, forcing herself to take in the space instead of the sting. The gala was more than an event. It was a map of Daniel's world, the one she'd been pushed out of. But as she scanned the room, she realized something. She knew this map better than anyone. She'd walked these marble floors on his arm for years, learned the rhythms, the power clusters, the unspoken hierarchies. The far left corner was where the journalists gathered, huddled around the city's most notorious gossip columnist, Madeleine Crowe, who could topple reputations with a single paragraph. The right wing was dominated by the old money set, families with names etched into the foundations of museums, and directly ahead, the front tables belonged to the new money titans, Daniel included. And then there was Adrian Wolfe. He sat at a table near the stage, but slightly off-center, as if to avoid the spotlight while still being able to command it when he chose. Even in a room of power, Adrian's presence was singular. People leaned toward him when he spoke, laughed just a little louder at his remarks. His table mates were a mix of international business leaders and philanthropists, people who moved markets and made headlines. Harper caught his gaze again. It was steady, unreadable, but not cold. He was studying her, and she realized with a jolt that she was doing the same. She'd read about him, how he'd built his fortune from a small shipping firm into a global investment empire, how he'd turned down interviews for years, letting his work speak for itself. But what fascinated her now wasn't his resume. It was that he didn't look at her the way everyone else in this room did. There was no pity, no curiosity laced with judgment, just interest. A passing waiter offered her a flute of champagne. She declined, resting a protective hand on her belly instead. The baby kicked again, as if echoing her decision. She took a step deeper into the ballroom, heels clicking softly against the polished marble. Conversations faltered in her wake. Heads turned. Near the center, she was intercepted by Margaret Voss, a jewelry designer Harper had once collaborated with on a boutique hotel project. "Harper, darling," Margaret said warmly, though her eyes flicked briefly toward Daniel's table. "You look radiant." It was the kind of word people used when they meant, "I didn't expect you to show up like this." "Thank you," Harper said smoothly, refusing to look in Daniel's direction. "How's the new collection?" Margaret launched into a description of her latest line, but Harper only half listened. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Daniel rise from his chair, his date clutching his arm. He was making his way toward her. The room seemed to tilt slightly, not from nerves, but from the anticipation of the scene about to unfold. Guests leaned subtly closer, eager for a taste of real-life drama to spice up their evening. "Harper," Daniel said when he reached her, his voice dripping with practiced civility. "I didn't know you'd be here." "Clearly," she replied, her tone calm but edged. His date, all sharp cheekbones and glossy hair, gave Harper a once-over, her lips curving into something between a smirk and a sneer. "Daniel was just telling me about the baby," she said, like it was a novelty item he'd once owned. Harper's stomach tightened, but she kept her expression neutral. "Was he?" Before Daniel could answer, Adrian's voice carried over the hum of the crowd. "Miss Langston?" Harper turned. Adrian was standing now, moving toward her with unhurried confidence. The crowd's attention shifted instantly, the air crackling with the unspoken question, "Why is Adrian Wolfe walking toward her?" He stopped beside her, his gaze flicking briefly to Daniel before settling on her again. "I was hoping you'd join me at my table," he said, his voice even, but leaving no room for refusal. Daniel's jaw tightened. "We're in the middle of a conversation." Adrian didn't look at him. "Then you'll understand if I borrow her for a better one." A hush fell over the immediate circle. Harper felt every eye on her, every whisper waiting to start. She could sense Daniel's anger, the way his pride bristled at being dismissed in front of an audience. She took Adrian's arm. Gasps rippled through the room as he guided her toward his table, past clusters of people who would be dissecting this moment before dessert was served. The quartet shifted into a softer melody, as if even the music recognized the change in the room's energy. As they reached the table, Adrian pulled out her chair. "You handled that well," he said quietly. "I wasn't aware I was being tested," she replied, settling in. "Oh, you were," he said, a faint smile touching his lips. "And you passed." For the first time that night, Harper allowed herself to exhale. But the battle wasn't over. In this room, in this city, nothing ever was. If the Grand Aurora Ballroom was a chessboard, Daniel Everett had always played as if he were the king. Slow, deliberate moves, always assuming the board existed for his benefit. But tonight, Harper saw something new in him. An edge, almost desperation, hidden beneath the tuxedo and polished grin. Daniel had been many things in their marriage. Charming, ambitious, cutting, but never sloppy. He was calculated to the point of obsession, the kind of man who read 3 annual reports before a casual lunch meeting. So his little public insult about pregnant women hadn't been careless. It was strategy. Because Daniel wasn't just here to celebrate the Hope Gala's cause. He was here to cement his next big deal, a partnership with Titanus Global, a European investment conglomerate run by men who valued image over ethics. Daniel knew that in their world, appearances were currency, and the optics of a recently divorced, childless CEO were far cleaner than a soon-to-be father tied to a woman he could no longer control. Enter Serena Vale. The molten gold-clad blonde was more than just a pretty face. She'd been the head of brand experience at Everett Dynamics for barely 8 months, but she'd already wormed her way into Daniel's inner circle. Her resume boasted years in luxury PR, though rumor had it she'd been quietly asked to leave her last firm after a scandal involving a married client. None of that mattered to Daniel. Serena was exactly the accessory he wanted on his arm tonight, young, fashionable, unencumbered. The way she looked at him, tilting her head with that perfectly rehearsed adoration, gave him the illusion of being both powerful and desired. She knew her role. Laugh at his jokes, lean in during photos, make the rest of the room believe he'd traded up. Harper knew the type. Serena had been watching her since the moment she walked in, eyes sharp behind the gloss and false lashes. Every shift in posture, every whisper to Daniel, was designed to draw an invisible line. "You're out? I'm in." The thing Serena didn't understand was that Harper had no interest in standing where she stood now. That spot came with strings, silence, and a slow erosion of self-worth. Harper had already paid that price. But Serena's ignorance was Daniel's weapon, proof that someone else was willing to fill the space Harper had left behind. From across Adrian Wolf's table, Harper could see Daniel glancing over between conversations with his investors. His smile never reached his eyes when he caught her gaze. He was assessing, recalculating. Daniel had built his empire on controlling narratives, and the sight of his ex-wife seated beside Adrian, one of the few men in the city who could outmatch him, wasn't part of his script. Adrian noticed too. "He's rattled," he murmured, leaning just close enough for her to hear over the string quartet. "Good," Harper replied, though her tone stayed even. "He's used to people playing his game. Maybe it's time he realizes the board's changed." Meanwhile, Serena's smile had turned brittle. She was used to being the most watched woman in the room, and Adrian's attention toward Harper had shifted the current. The photographers who'd been angling for shots of Daniel and Serena were now discreetly circling Harper's side of the room. Serena leaned in toward Daniel, whispering something behind her hand. Daniel's jaw tightened. Harper could almost hear the conversation in her head. Serena asking who Adrian was and why Harper was sitting with him. Daniel brushing it off but promising to handle it. It was the same tone he'd used in their marriage whenever something or someone threatened his perfect image. And Daniel's image was everything. He'd grown up the son of a bankrupt car dealer, clawing his way through college on scholarships and part-time jobs, his eyes always fixed on the life he thought he deserved. Success had given him money, but it hadn't softened the chip on his shoulder. Every deal, every headline, every glossy magazine spread was another brick in the fortress he'd built to keep the world from seeing how much he still feared losing it all. That fear was why he'd been so quick to sideline Harper when her pregnancy didn't fit the brand. Investors liked visionary leaders, not fathers juggling diaper duty. Daniel had told himself, and probably Serena, that cutting Harper out was business, not personal, but his insult at the gala proved otherwise. He wanted her diminished, erased. What he hadn't counted on was Harper refusing to play the part. As the charity auction began, Daniel stood to make a speech. Harper watched him mount the stage, adjusting his cufflinks like a general straightening his uniform. His voice filled the room, smooth, confident, peppered with jokes that drew polite laughter. He spoke about innovation, community, and the importance of supporting the city's youth. To anyone who didn't know him, he looked flawless. But Harper noticed the way his eyes kept darting toward her table between lines, how his hand lingered on the lectern a beat too long. She knew he was recalibrating in real time, figuring out how to spin tonight so that his narrative stayed intact. When the applause came, Daniel descended the stage straight to the Titanus global executives, Serena trailing behind like a shadow. They clustered near the champagne tower, the conversation animated but tight. Harper didn't need to hear it to know the stakes. If Titanus saw Adrian Wolf showing interest in her, they'd wonder why. And if they wondered why, they might start asking questions Daniel didn't want answered. Across the room, Adrian's voice drew her back. "He's going to make a move," he said quietly. "Let him," Harper replied, keeping her gaze steady on Daniel. Sure enough, moments later, Daniel excused himself from the investors and started toward her table, Serena still at his side. This time there was no polite smile. His eyes were hard, his jaw set. "Harper," he said when he reached them, his tone clipped. "A word, in private." Adrian's hand rested lightly on the back of her chair, a subtle gesture, but one that made Daniel's nostrils flare. "Anything you have to say, you can say here," Harper said. Daniel's gaze flicked to Adrian. "This doesn't concern you." Adrian smiled faintly. "If it concerns her, it concerns me." A silence stretched, taut as wire. Serena shifted beside Daniel, clearly uncomfortable. The eyes of nearby guests burned on them, waiting for the next move. Daniel leaned in, lowering his voice but not enough to escape the room's sharp ears. "You think sitting at his table is going to change anything? You're still..." He caught himself glancing at Adrian, then back at Harper. "You're still you." Harper met his stare, calm and unflinching. "Exactly. And that's the problem for you, isn't it?" Daniel straightened, his composure cracking for just a moment before he turned on his heel and stalked away, Serena hurrying to keep up. As they disappeared into the crowd, Harper felt the tiniest shift in the room's air. The whispers would spread, the balance would change, and for the first time in a long while, Daniel wasn't holding all the pieces. The charity auction was in full swing, and the Grand Aurora Ballroom thrummed with the competitive energy of people who measured generosity in the number of zeros they could outbid their peers with. The auctioneer's voice rang out from the stage. "We'll start the bidding at $50,000 for a private Mediterranean yacht cruise, donated by Titanus Global." Hands shot up across the room. Waiters navigated the crowd with trays of champagne, weaving between murmured conversations and bursts of applause. From Adrian Wolf's table, Harper watched the scene like an outsider peering into a world she once lived in. She could feel Daniel's presence even when she couldn't see him, an oppressive awareness, like standing too close to a storm cloud. She knew he wasn't finished with her tonight. Daniel never walked away without trying to reclaim control. Sure enough, she spotted him across the room, speaking with the Titanus Global executives, his arm gesturing subtly in her direction. The men glanced over, curiosity flickering in their eyes. Then Daniel smiled that carefully curated smile, and Harper felt the prickle of anticipation crawl up her spine. The auctioneer tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we continue, our esteemed host for the evening, Mr. Daniel Everett, would like to make a special announcement." Applause rippled politely as Daniel stepped onto the stage, Serena trailing behind him like a sequined shadow. He accepted the microphone from the auctioneer and faced the crowd, his expression all practiced warmth. "I want to thank each and every one of you for being here tonight," Daniel began. "This gala isn't just about raising money, it's about celebrating the future." And speaking of the future, his eyes found Harper's, and she knew instantly this wasn't going to be about charity. "I'm thrilled to share some personal news," Daniel continued, resting a hand on Serena's back. "In a few short months, Serena and I will be launching a new philanthropic initiative, one that focuses on empowering young entrepreneurs. Serena will be leading this effort as our new Director of Innovation at Everett Dynamics." Polite applause followed, but Harper felt the air in the room tighten. The subtext was as loud as a shout. Serena wasn't just Daniel's date. She was stepping into a public role, a role that once belonged to Harper during their marriage. Daniel wasn't finished. "And while we're here celebrating fresh beginnings," he said, his voice dropping just enough to carry a different kind of weight, "I believe in recognizing when chapters close. It's important to wish people well when they move on." So, to Harper Langston, every head in the room turned toward her. The spotlight, quite literally, swung to her table. "I want to wish you the very best as you transition into this new stage of life," Daniel said, his smile sharp enough to cut glass. "We all know motherhood is a full-time job, one that doesn't leave much room for other ambitions, but I'm sure you'll do just fine." The implication landed like a slap. Around the room, some guests exchanged awkward glances, others smirked behind their champagne flutes. Serena's smile was all teeth. Harper's fingers tightened around the stem of her glass, but she kept her face composed. This was the move she'd been waiting for. The public strike meant to box her into the role of a discarded, soon-to-be-forgotten ex-wife. Daniel wanted her to sit there, humiliated, while he painted her as someone whose only future was diapers and bedtime stories. Adrian's voice was low but steady beside her. "If you want to respond, now's the time." Harper's heart pounded, but her mind was clear. She stood, the silk of her gown catching the light as she walked toward the stage. Conversations died mid-sentence. The spotlight followed her, turning her into the second act of Daniel's little performance. When she reached the steps, the auctioneer offered her a hand, which she ignored. Daniel looked briefly pleased, until she took the microphone from him without asking. "Thank you, Daniel," she said, her tone warm but threaded with steel. "I appreciate the encouragement." A few scattered chuckles from the crowd. She let the silence stretch just long enough. "But I think you left out a detail or two," Harper continued. Yes, I'm about to become a mother. And yes, it's a full-time job, one I'm honored to take on. But that doesn't mean my other ambitions vanish. In fact, they're thriving. Langston & Co., the design firm I founded before I even met you, just signed an international contract worth more than the yacht Titanus donated tonight. A ripple of surprise moved through the audience. Adrian, still seated, watched her with something close to pride. And as for fresh beginnings, Harper said, her gaze locking on Serena, sometimes they mean letting go of something that no longer serves you, or someone. The ballroom was silent now, except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Daniel's jaw was tight, his smile frozen in place. Serena shifted uncomfortably beside him. Harper handed the microphone back to the auctioneer and turned to step down from the stage. But before she reached her table, Adrian rose to meet her, offering his arm. The gesture was small, but in the charged air of the ballroom it was seismic. Cameras flashed. Whispers erupted like sparks catching dry grass. As they sat, Harper caught a glimpse of Daniel across the room, his face a mask of polite fury as the Titanized executives murmured among themselves. Whatever narrative he'd hoped to write tonight had been rewritten in real time, and he wasn't holding the pen anymore. The auction resumed, but the energy in the room had shifted. The murmurs were no longer about Daniel's deal or Serena's dress. They were about Harper Langston, the pregnant woman who'd stood in the spotlight and reminded everyone she was more than a footnote in her ex-husband's story. And as Adrian leaned toward her, his voice barely above the music, she realized something else. This wasn't the end of Daniel's games, but it was the beginning of hers. The applause from the gala still echoed faintly in Harper's ears as she stepped out into the cold night air. The city lights glittered like broken glass against the wet pavement, the rain finally reduced to a mist. The doorman hailed a car for her, but she barely noticed. From the outside, she'd won. She'd stood her ground in front of the city's elite, refused to let Daniel's words define her, and walked away with Adrian Wolfe at her side. But now, alone in the back of the town car, the adrenaline drained out of her like a tide receding, leaving only exhaustion behind. She pressed a hand to her belly. The baby shifted, a small reminder that she wasn't really alone. Still, the weight of what had just happened pressed down on her chest. Her phone buzzed in her clutch. 3 unread messages from friends who had been at the gala. You were incredible tonight. Daniel's face was priceless. Proud of you. She appreciated them. But none of the messages touched the knot in her stomach. Harper wasn't naive. Daniel wasn't the type to let public embarrassment slide. He would hit back, subtly, strategically, and when he did, he'd aim for the places she was most vulnerable. The car pulled up outside her apartment building, a modest pre-war structure in a quiet corner of the Upper West Side. Harper had chosen it deliberately after the divorce. Not flashy, but secure. Inside, the elevator groaned its way up to the 6th floor. The apartment greeted her with soft lamplight and the faint scent of lavender from the diffuser she kept running in the living room. It should have felt safe. Instead, it felt small. She kicked off her heels, the ache in her feet flaring now that she wasn't forcing her posture. In the bathroom, she caught sight of herself in the mirror. Storm blue gown, perfect hair, makeup still mostly intact. To anyone else, she looked like a woman in control. But she knew the truth. Her hands trembled as she unclipped her earrings. The night replayed in fragments. Daniel's smirk, Serena's smug smile, the way the room had turned when the spotlight found her. She'd handled it well in the moment, but under the gloss of confidence was something brittle. She poured herself a glass of water and sat on the edge of her bed. It was well past midnight, but sleep felt impossible. Her mind kept circling the same question. What now? Langston & Co. was thriving without her day-to-day involvement, thanks to Mia's leadership. But Harper knew Daniel wouldn't stop at personal humiliation. He might try to undermine her business, spread rumors to scare off investors, or use legal channels to tangle her in endless disputes. And with a baby on the way, she didn't have the luxury of endless energy for battles. Her phone buzzed again, this time an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. Miss Langston? The voice was deep, steady. Adrian Wolfe. I hope it's not too late to call, he said. I wanted to make sure you got home safely. I did, she replied, unsure how to navigate the sudden shift from public ally to private caller. You handled yourself well tonight, Adrian continued, but you know Everett won't let this go. I'm aware, she said quietly. There was a pause on the line. I've seen men like him before. They burn every bridge they cross, and they don't notice until they're standing alone. The question is, how much damage will you let him do before you decide to take his matches away? The words landed heavier than she expected. I'm not looking for a war, Mr. Wolf. Neither am I, he said, but sometimes the only way to stop a predator is to make it clear you're not prey. She didn't respond right away. Eventually, he added, think about it. I'll be in touch. Then the line went dead. Harper set the phone down and leaned back against the headboard. His words stirred something in her, part warning, part challenge. But beneath that, there was still the hollow ache she couldn't shake. The next morning, she woke to headlines. The society columns had pounced on the scene at the gala. Pregnant ex-wife steals spotlight from tech mogul at Hope Gala. Adrian Wolf and Harper Langston, new power alliance? Some painted her as a symbol of quiet defiance. Others, more venomous, framed it as desperation, implying she was using Adrian to cling to relevance. She knew exactly where those rumors came from. Daniel had his fingerprints all over them. By noon, a journalist called for a comment. She declined, but the damage was already circulating. Social media was a swirl of speculation, with strangers dissecting her life as if they knew her. Around 3, Mia called from the Langston & Co. office. You're trending, Harper. And not in a bad way, mostly. But Daniel's people are definitely trying to seed a story about you being unstable. Harper closed her eyes. I knew he'd come for me. We can handle the PR, Mia said, but you need to be ready for him to escalate. After they hung up, Harper sat at her kitchen table, staring at the steam curling from her tea. She thought she was prepared for the fallout, but the truth was, the public performance had drained her more than she'd realized. For years, she'd measured her worth by how well she could keep her composure. Now, with the baby's arrival drawing closer, that composure felt like glass. Intact for now, but one sharp blow away from shattering. By evening, the rain had returned, pattering softly against the windows. Harper curled up on the couch, a blanket draped over her shoulders, and let herself feel the weight of it all. The fear, the anger, the loneliness. She'd stood tall at the gala, but here, in the quiet, she let her guard drop. Tears slid down her cheeks before she could stop them. She hated crying. It felt like a loss of control. But the sobs came anyway, shaking her shoulders until the blanket slipped to the floor. She pressed her face into her hands, willing herself to breathe, to remember that one public moment didn't erase the private battles still ahead. When the storm outside deepened, she finally rose and made her way to the bedroom. She lay on her side, one hand over her belly, listening to the rhythm of her own heartbeat and the rain. She whispered, "It's just us, kid. But we're going to be okay. We have to be." The baby kicked softly, almost like an answer. Harper closed her eyes. She didn't have all the answers yet, but she knew one thing. This low point, this exhaustion, it wouldn't be the end. Somewhere inside the collapse was the spark of what came next. She just had to survive long enough to reach it. 3 days after the gala, Harper sat at the corner table of a quiet cafe in Soho, her laptop open but untouched. She'd come here to think, away from the constant ping of her phone and the scrutiny that now seemed to follow her everywhere. The headlines had begun to slow, but the undercurrent of speculation was still there, simmering on gossip sites and whispered in circles she used to move through without a second thought. A bell jingled at the door. Harper looked up to see Adrian Wolf step inside. He didn't scan the room. He walked straight to her, as if he'd known exactly where she'd be. "You're hard to pin down," he said, sliding into the seat across from her. "That's intentional," she replied. He placed a sleek leather folder on the table between them. "Then let me be direct. I have a proposal for you." Harper arched a brow. "Business." "Everything is business," Adrian said simply, "including personal wars." He opened the folder to reveal a series of documents, mock-ups of architectural designs, contracts, and a formal partnership agreement. "I own the Wolf Institute," he began, "a philanthropic arm that funds large-scale urban development projects. We're expanding into luxury eco-resorts across Europe and Asia. I've seen your work, Harper. Your firm's designs are innovative, functional, and beautiful. I want Langston & Co. to lead the design for our flagship resort in Santorini." Her breath caught. "That's a massive project." "It is," Adrian agreed, "and it comes with international press coverage, investor interest, and a budget that makes Everett Dynamics look like a lemonade stand. The kind of spotlight Daniel can't diminish, no matter how loud he talks." Harper leaned back, processing. "Why me? You could hire any firm in the world." Adrian's gaze was steady. "Because you're better than any of them. And because I don't like seeing talent wasted because a man thinks he can define you." She hesitated. "If I take this, it's going to look like I'm using you to get back at him." He smiled faintly. "Let it look that way. In business, perception is a tool. Use it." Harper stared at the designs in front of her. The resort was stunning. Whitewashed stone, infinity pools that melted into the Aegean, solar panels disguised within the architecture. She could already see her signature touches in the blueprints, ways to blend her coastal upbringing with modern elegance. "This isn't just about a project," Adrian continued. "It's about making sure that when people hear your name, they think of what you build, not who you used to be married to." Harper closed the folder. "I'll think about it." Adrian studied her for a moment, then nodded. "You have until Friday." He stood, leaving a business card on the table. "And Harper, if you're worried about Daniel retaliating, don't be. I've dealt with bigger predators." After he left, Harper sat in silence. She thought of the years she'd put her own career aside for Daniel's ambitions, the sketches gathering dust in her studio, the way her name had become a footnote in his story. She thought of the baby growing inside her and the kind of example she wanted to set. That night, she called Mia. "How do you feel about taking on the biggest project of our lives?" Mia's squeal of excitement nearly burst Harper's eardrum. "Are you serious, Santorini?" "Serious," Harper confirmed, "but it's going to be under intense scrutiny. We'll be in headlines." "Then we make them good headlines," Mia said firmly. By Thursday, Harper called Adrian to accept. The following week, Wolf Institute issued a press release. Wolf Institute partners with Langston & Co. for flagship Santorini Resort. It didn't mention Daniel Everett. It didn't need to. The media did that on its own. Within hours, headlines linked Harper's new venture to her public stand at the gala. Social media lit up with side-by-side photos, Daniel and Serena on stage, Harper and Adrian reviewing blueprints. The contrast was brutal. Daniel called that night. She almost didn't answer. "Harper," he said, his tone tight. "What the hell are you doing?" "Working," she replied evenly. "You think this little stunt is going to make you untouchable? You're walking into a fight you can't win." "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe I've been in a fight for years, and you just didn't notice because I wasn't swinging back." There was a long pause before Daniel hung up without another word. In the weeks that followed, Harper threw herself into the project. Site visits, design meetings, investor presentations. She was back in her element, her name in the press for all the right reasons. And the more the project took shape, the more she realized something. Adrian's offer hadn't just been about business. It had been about reminding her who she was before Daniel's shadow loomed over her life. One afternoon, as they walked the Santorini site together, Adrian said, "You know, you never told me why you started your firm in the first place." Harper smiled faintly. "Because I wanted to build spaces that made people feel the way I did in my parents' house, safe, seen, at home. Even in the middle of a city, even if they'd never had that before." Adrian nodded. "Then let's make this resort exactly that. Not just for guests, for you." And for the first time in a long time, Harper believed it was possible. The first time Harper walked into the Wolf Institute's Manhattan headquarters after accepting the Santorini project, she still wore the muted tones she'd grown accustomed to during her marriage. Soft grays, navy, taupe. Clothes that didn't draw attention, that allowed her to blend into Daniel's world without overshadowing him. That ended within a month. Working alongside Adrian's team was like stepping into a different atmosphere. One where her ideas were not only heard, but amplified. Every meeting, every presentation, she felt herself standing taller, speaking louder, reclaiming the space she'd once surrendered. Mia noticed it first. "You're different," she said during a late-night Zoom call. "Your voice, there's power in it now." Harper shrugged, but she felt it too. The project was enormous, designing a luxury eco-resort that would balance elegance with sustainability. It required boldness, precision, and a willingness to take risks. Harper was making choices without second-guessing, trusting her instincts the way she had when she first started Langston & Co. And as her confidence grew, so did her public image. The press covered the project relentlessly, often focusing on Harper herself. From ex-wife to empire builder, read one headline. Harper Langston's vision goes global, read another. She stopped avoiding interviews and started shaping her own narrative. Adrian insisted on hiring a stylist for the press events. At first, Harper resisted. She didn't want to become some manufactured image. But the stylist, a sharp-eyed woman named Lila, understood instantly what Harper needed. "We're not changing you," Lila said, flipping through fabric swatches. "We're revealing you. There's a difference." Gone were the safe neutrals. Harper began wearing bold architectural silhouettes that echoed her own design aesthetic. Clean lines, rich colors, unexpected details. A crimson silk coat over a midnight jumpsuit, a structured white dress with an asymmetrical neckline. Even her maternity wear became a statement. Elegant, unapologetic, impossible to ignore. Her hair, once kept in soft waves to please Daniel's preference for effortless beauty, was now styled sleek and deliberate, sometimes pulled back to show the strength in her face. And when she walked into a room, she no longer tried to disappear into the wallpaper. The change wasn't just external. Harper's mindset shifted in quiet but seismic ways. She stopped apologizing for taking up space. She stopped softening her words to make others comfortable. In design meetings, she challenged architects twice her age, defending her vision with calm authority. At investor luncheons, she spoke as the head of her firm, not as someone's plus one. Adrian noticed the transformation too. "You've stopped looking over your shoulder," he said one evening as they reviewed renderings. "I didn't realize how often I did it," she admitted. "That's because you were used to a man who needed you to doubt yourself," Adrian replied. "Now you're in a room where doubt is a liability." The turning point came 6 weeks before the resort's groundbreaking ceremony. Harper received an invitation to the International Design Awards Gala, an event she'd avoided for years because Daniel dominated the guest list. This year, the Wolf Institute was one of the main sponsors, and Harper's Santorini project was already creating buzz in the design community. "You should go," Mia urged. "It's going to be crawling with Daniel's people," Harper countered. "Exactly," Mia said. "And you won't be crawling. You'll be walking in like the woman who just landed one of the most prestigious design contracts of the decade." Harper decided she would. The night of the gala, Lila arrived at Harper's apartment with a garment bag and a knowing smile. "I've been saving this for you." Inside was a gown unlike anything Harper had ever worn. Sleek black silk that skimmed her figure, the high collar dipping into a dramatic open back, a train that whispered across the floor when she moved. It was both armor and spotlight. "This isn't just a dress," Lila said. "It's a declaration." When Harper arrived at the venue, cameras immediately swung in her direction. The flashbulbs popped like fireworks, journalists calling her name. She didn't flinch, didn't rush past. She paused, smiled, let them capture the woman she'd become. Inside, she moved through the crowd with deliberate grace. Every conversation was an opportunity, not for revenge, but for building alliances that had nothing to do with Daniel. She spoke with editors, investors, fellow designers, always steering the narrative toward the Santorini project and the vision behind it. Daniel was there, of course, Serena glittering at his side. When their eyes met across the room, Harper didn't look away. She gave a small, polite nod, the kind you'd give a stranger at a crosswalk, and turned back to the CEO she'd been speaking with. The dismissal was subtle but devastating. By the end of the night, Harper had secured 3 new potential projects and an invitation to speak at a global design summit in Paris. On the car ride home, she caught her reflection in the window. The woman staring back wasn't the one who had stood at the entrance of the Hope Gala, flushed with fury and humiliation. This woman had rebuilt herself piece by piece, career, image, confidence, until there was nothing left Daniel could claim as his. Back in her apartment, she kicked off her heels and slipped into bed, one hand resting on her belly. The baby kicked and she smiled. "We're almost there," she whispered. When you arrive, you'll meet a mother who doesn't just survive, she wins. And deep down, Harper knew the final stage of her transformation was yet to come. The moment she would stand in full daylight, not just as the woman who'd been wronged, but as the woman who had written her own ending. The International Design Summit in Paris was the kind of event where careers could be made or destroyed overnight. Held in the ornate Palais Garnier, it was a week-long convergence of the world's most influential architects, developers, and investors. The Santorini resort was scheduled to be unveiled during the summit's final night gala, and Harper knew the audience would include the same high-powered crowd that once orbited Daniel Everett. And Daniel himself. She found out he'd be there when the official program was released. Keynote panel: The Future of Sustainable Luxury, featuring Daniel Everett, Everett Dynamics, Harper Langston, Langston & Co., and Adrian Wolf, Wolf Institute. It wasn't a coincidence. The panel had been arranged weeks in advance, but Harper recognized Daniel's fingerprints all over the choice. He was going to try to overshadow her on stage, just as he had at the Hope Gala. The difference was, this time, she wasn't coming unarmed. On the night of the gala, Harper stepped out of her car in a gown the color of molten silver, the fabric catching the light with every move. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek twist, diamond drop earrings framing her face. She was 8 months pregnant now, and she wore it like a crown. Cameras flashed wildly as she walked the crimson-carpeted steps of the Palais, Adrian at her side. Inside, the stage was set with 3 chairs and a glass podium. The audience filled the gilded auditorium, conversations echoing under the painted dome. Harper took her seat beside Adrian, directly across from Daniel. He gave her a tight smile, meant to rattle her, but she only returned a polite nod. The panel began with moderated questions about design philosophy and sustainability. Adrian spoke first, laying out the Wolf Institute's commitment to environmentally responsible luxury. Then, it was Daniel's turn. He leaned forward, charming the audience with rehearsed anecdotes, careful to frame Everett Dynamics as a leader in innovative living spaces. When the moderator turned to Harper, Daniel made his move. "Of course," he said smoothly, "Miss Langston has a unique perspective. Balancing a demanding career with the impending responsibilities of motherhood must be a challenge. I imagine it limits certain ambitions." The tone was pleasant, but the jab was razor-sharp. The audience shifted, sensing tension. Harper smiled, but there was steel in her voice. "It's interesting you bring that up, Daniel, because for me, becoming a mother hasn't limited my ambitions. It's expanded them. I'm designing not just for clients, but for the next generation. And the Santorini project is proof that you can lead on the global stage without sacrificing what matters most." Applause broke out, but Harper wasn't finished. She reached for the small remote hidden under her notes and clicked to bring up the first slide on the massive screen behind them. A 3D rendering of the Santorini resort filled the screen: sunlit terraces, glass-walled suites, and her signature architectural flourishes. "This," she said, turning to the audience, "is the future of sustainable luxury. Langston & Co. has partnered with the Wolf Institute to create a space that not only blends with its natural surroundings, but actively contributes to the preservation of the island's ecosystem. Solar integration, water reclamation, and a zero-waste design process, things Everett Dynamics has yet to implement in its residential projects." The last line landed like a hammer. A few gasps rippled through the crowd. Adrian's lips curved slightly, but he said nothing. This was Harper's stage. Daniel shifted in his seat. "We've explored similar initiatives." "Explored," Harper cut in, her tone polite but unyielding. "Meanwhile, we've built them. The groundbreaking is in 6 weeks, and we're already booked for the first year of operation. The demand is proof that innovation doesn't wait for permission." The audience erupted in applause, this time louder. Cameras flashed. Somewhere in the balcony, a journalist typed furiously. And then Harper delivered the final blow. "As part of this project," she said, "we're launching the Langston Fellowship, a program funding young architects from underrepresented communities to study and work on international projects, fully funded by the resort's profits. Because creating beautiful spaces means nothing if we don't create opportunities for the next generation to design them." The applause turned into a standing ovation. Even some of Daniel's usual allies rose to their feet. The moderator, caught up in the energy, wrapped the panel quickly. As they exited the stage, Daniel caught Harper's arm. "Nice performance," he said under his breath, "but this won't last." Harper met his gaze, unflinching. "You're right, this isn't a performance. This is the rest of my life." She walked away before he could reply, Adrian falling into step beside her. At the gala dinner that followed, Harper was surrounded by potential partners, journalists, and designers eager to work with her. Every conversation, every handshake felt like a nail sealing the coffin of Daniel's control over her narrative. Later that night, as she stood on the balcony overlooking Paris, Adrian joined her with 2 glasses of sparkling water. "You didn't just win tonight," he said. "You rewrote the game." Harper looked out at the glittering city, one hand resting on her belly. "No," she said quietly. "I just remembered I was always playing it." The weeks after the Paris summit moved quickly. The Santorini resort project became the darling of the international design press, gracing the covers of industry magazines and trending on social media feeds across continents. Investors poured in, not just for the project, but for Harper Langston herself. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was running from Daniel's shadow. She was running toward something of her own making. Her days were packed. Video conferences with the Greek construction team, consultations with environmental engineers, strategy meetings with Adrian. At night, she'd sit in her apartment with design sketches spread across the coffee table, the baby's rhythmic kicks keeping her company. Then, one crisp spring morning, Harper stood on the Santorini cliffs. The sea stretched out endlessly before her, its blue so vivid it seemed almost unreal. The groundbreaking ceremony was moments away. Local officials, international press, and the Wolf Institute's board members milled about under white canopies. The air buzzed with excitement, but Harper felt a calm settle over her. She wore a white linen dress that skimmed her pregnant form, her hair loose and wind-tossed. No armor, no stage makeup, just herself. Adrian approached, offering her a small velvet box. "This is for you," he said. Inside was a delicate necklace, an uncut diamond suspended on a thin gold chain. "It's not polished," he explained, "because you didn't need to be made perfect. You were always enough." Harper smiled, touched in a way she couldn't put into words. She clasped it around her neck, feeling its quiet weight. When it was time for speeches, Adrian introduced her as the visionary behind the project. The applause was immediate and genuine. Harper stepped up to the podium, the breeze tugging at her dress. "I've been asked what this resort means to me," she began. "And the truth is, it's more than buildings and blueprints. It's proof that no one, not circumstance, not opinion, not even betrayal, gets to define the limits of what you can build. Only you do." She paused, scanning the crowd. "I was told once that nobody wants a pregnant woman. I believed it for longer than I should have. But standing here today, I realize something. The people who matter will always want you, not for what you can give them, but for who you are when you stop trying to fit their version of your life." The crowd was silent for a moment before applause swelled, rolling over her like a tide. Harper felt the baby shift, as if joining in. The rest of the day passed in a blur of handshakes, photographs, and laughter. At sunset, as the last of the guests departed, Harper lingered on the terrace overlooking the Aegean. The sky burned gold and crimson, and for the first time in a long time, she felt entirely at peace. That night, back in her suite, she opened her laptop to find an email from an unknown address. "I saw the news. Congratulations." No name, but she knew it was Daniel. She stared at it for a moment, then closed the laptop without replying. He was just another part of the past now, irrelevant to the life she was building. 2 months later, Harper gave birth to a daughter. She named her Isla, after the Greek word for island, a nod to the place where she had reclaimed herself. Holding her in the hospital room, Harper whispered, "You'll never have to wonder if you're wanted." The following year, the Santorini resort opened to sold-out bookings and rave reviews. Harper stood at the entrance during opening week, greeting guests from all over the world. Ela was in a sling against her chest, sleeping soundly as Harper walked the grounds, her heart full. She saw couples taking in the sunset from the infinity pool, families laughing on the terraces, young architects sketching details of the resort. It was everything she had envisioned, a space that felt alive, welcoming, and lasting. Mia joined her by the pool. "We just got word," she said. "Langston & Co. has been invited to design 2 more resorts, one in Bali, one in the Maldives. You're officially global." Harper laughed, the sound light and unrestrained. "Then let's build them." That night, as she tucked Ela into her crib, Harper thought about the woman she had been at the start of this journey. The one who walked into the Hope Gala feeling exposed and humiliated. That woman had no idea that humiliation could be the spark for something greater. Because the truth she had learned, the truth she would teach her daughter, was simple. You are never as powerless as someone wants you to believe. Power isn't given. It's taken back, piece by piece, until you remember it was yours all along. Harper kissed Isla's forehead, turned off the light, and stepped out onto the balcony. The night air was warm, the stars scattered like diamonds. Somewhere out there people were still whispering her name, some in admiration, some in resentment. It didn't matter. She had built her life, her way. And nothing, not an ex-husband's cruelty, not a room full of skeptics, not the fear of starting over, could take that from her. So the story has ended, our wonderful friends. Are you still here with me right now? If you are, it means something in Harper's journey has touched your heart in some way. Maybe it's the reminder that, as the heterodox saying goes, the wound is where the light enters you. Life will try to convince you you're small, but you get to decide how big you truly are. So take your power back, piece by piece, and live your own design. If this story has moved you, drop a comment below, like this video, share it with someone who needs it. And don't forget to subscribe so you and I can keep walking through more stories that heal and inspire.